Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Thursday, the 6th day of November, 2025. And in the news, reality has not set in for every Israeli leader. And we also find that people are beginning to realize that Mandani is even worse than everyone thought. And then a story that just came across the wire. Kazakhstan has now joined the Abraham Accords. That's just came across the wire just a little bit ago. All right, we have three stories that are headlines here. First of all, from Israel National News, Israeli Minister Avi Dichter says ceasefire is only a pause. Hamas will be dismantled by force. Well, good luck with that. And then from the New York Post, an excellent article by Michael Goodwin. Graceless sore winner Zohran Mamdani immediately drops his mask and declares war on New York City. This goes into detail what we mentioned yesterday about Mandani as the sore winner. And then from virtual Jerusalem, piggybacking on that, his win, Mandani's win, endangers all Jews, not just New Yorkers. And then again, the one on Kazakhstan, they've just joined the Abraham Accords. Sorry, we're a little late today. We had a lot to do around the house and it just kept me busy. And so we finally got to recording these things. And we want to always do two a day if we can possibly do it. So here we are. It's always better late than never. All right. Let's look at the headlines. Headline number one, Israeli Minister Avi Dichter, ceasefire is only a pause. Hamas will be dismantled by force. Again, Israel National News. Minister Avi Dichter said the ceasefire is intended solely to prepare for dismantling Hamas and can be ended at any moment. Cabinet member and former Shin Bet, that's his Israel Security Agency chief, Dichter, stated that the ceasefire reached by Israel is intended solely as preparation for the next phase, namely the dismantling of Hamas. The war is not over. We're in a ceasefire to prepare for the next stage. If necessary, the pause will disappear within minutes, he said at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs conference in Tel Aviv. He asserted that Hamas will never voluntarily disarm. We all know that. The likelihood of Hamas laying down its weapons is about the same as Israel winning the World Cup. Without weapons, there is no Hamas. He warned that Hamas is attempting to buy time studying Hezbollah's tactics in Lebanon while stalling on the issue of returning the bodies of hostages. The war will not end until all seven hostages are returned. We will not tolerate games. And by the way, speaking of Lebanon, that's really, really heated up today. The rhetoric, there was bombing by Israel today after we did our first broadcast in Lebanon. And so Hezbollah is being just as um, violent now, just as pig-headed as Hamas, saying we're not giving up. We're not giving up our weapons. We still gonna fight the struggle. And so it seems that Israel can't get a moment of peace here. So anyway, um, Dichter going on, he says we're not going to tolerate gains from Hamas. He emphasized Israel's obligation to combat delays and manipulations surrounding the return of the missing and addressing Gaza's political future. He says he made it clear that the territory must not be handed over to the Palestinian Authority, giving the milk to the cat. That won't happen. He also noted that Israel's current position allows for the advancement of regional shifts on multiple fronts, from strengthening deterrence to expanding the Abraham Accords. And that's again what just happened tonight with Kazakhstan joining, and stressed the opportunity to leverage momentum to reshape Israel's strategic standing in the region. All right, but it seems not everyone has accepted the new reality in Gaza and the Middle East. How we wish things were different. The story we did today, the 3 points that were made in the story from Israel Hayom, that the reality is Hamas is not going to disarm. The reality is that there's not going to be any peace there in Gaza. There's not going to be any group that will come from some other Arab country or non-Arab country to soldier, to be peacekeepers there. And that again, Hamas will never give up their weapons, and the Palestinian Authority will never rule there because there's no neutral group to rule either, even if you had peacekeepers there. So again, this is a sad situation, but here's where it's at. Now, this story here piggybacks what we talked about yesterday a little bit. We mentioned Mandani, when he gave his victory speech, he started yelling and screaming, and the people were rather shocked with that. Van Jones from CNN, who was a very uber leftist, said he had a chance to really bring people together and he didn't do it. This is very strange. This is not who we've seen on the campaign trail. And so Michael Goodwin from the New York Post writes this excellent story about what he actually said and what was brought across, because I'm sure most of us didn't watch it. And so it's good to know what went on. And the headline is Graceless sore winner. Zohran Mamdani immediately drops his mask and declares war on New York City. Again, from the New York Post. Having fallen in love with the sound of his own voice and apparently convinced he is heaven sent, a besotted Zohran Mamdani missed the warning that you never give a second chance to make a first impression. So it was that his victory speech Tuesday night had no hint of grace or gratitude to New York or America. Its sneering, triumphalist tone was especially unbecoming for an immigrant in a city that generously opened its arms to embrace him and his family decades ago. Rather than any expression of appreciation, his relentless criticism of his political predecessors and successful New Yorkers sounded like a battle cry coming from the interior of a Trojan horse. Without doubt, he was declaring war against President Trump and, by extension, anyone else who has the nerve to oppose our newly crowned ruler. Especially striking was the fact that Mandani offered only the back of his hand to more than the 1 million New Yorkers who voted for his opponents. Had the better angels been able to get through to this self-aggrandizing arbor, Gotham's next mayor surely would have included at least perfunctory promises and pleas for civic unity. But there was not a word of fellowship to those who didn't buy the discount store bromides he's been selling. Now that he's been elected, he expects 8 million people to keep their mouths shut and accept him and his socialist agenda unconditionally. His actual opponents were scorned or ignored, as if the election marks only a brief timeout in his war against them and against disagreement itself. Traditional niceties and graciousness apparently are far beneath chosen ones who see themselves as the end all and be all. In their minds, election night is only a respite in the battle for power and ideological supremacy. If there is an upside to such a downbeat speech, it's that the image of a smiling, nice guy that Mandami worked hard to cultivate has now been exposed as a fraud. When the mask dropped, we clearly saw the fangs of contempt and bitter grievance. His dark heart came through loud and clear in his depiction of New York City as something of a modern slave state where the ruling class of landlords, bankers, and even neighborhood merchants sucks the life out of everyone else. So it's back to class war. In a sweeping statement that clearly didn't apply only to the Adams administration, he claimed that those in City Hall have only helped those who can help them. But on January 1st, we will usher in a city government that helps everyone. Our new savior also decried a prism of misinformation, apparently referring to the fact that his opponents were able to raise money to run commercials against him. Tens of millions of dollars have been spent to redefine reality and to convince our neighbors that this new age is something that should frighten them, he declared. As Michael Goodwin said, it's called politics, and nothing is so off-putting as a sore winner, which is what he is. From there, he was back to his Bernie Sanders-like obsession with class and wealth. As has so often occurred, the billionaire class has sought to convince those making $30 an hour that their enemies are those earning $20 an hour, he insisted. Naturally, Mamdani tossed around his favorite socialist words of the day, promising a fight against oligarchy and authoritarianism with the strength it fears, not the appeasement it craves. He then declared that if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. If there is any way to terrify a despot, it's by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. Then it was all back to all property owners declaring we will hold bad landlords to account because the Donald Trumps of our city have grown far too comfortable taking advantage of their tenants. Then he picked a fight with Trump. He vowed to put an end to the culture of corruption that has allowed billionaires like Trump to evade taxation and exploit tax breaks. It might be news to him that tax break for developers and others are written into laws by Albany, that's in the capital of New York, not New York City, where he still serves as a Queens assemblyman. Perhaps he should have a word with his new best friend, the clueless Governor Hochul, about how laws are written and why incentives are needed to coax builders into working in New York. He might even learn what an enormous hindrance state and city taxes are and how endless red tape and regulations inflate the cost of even modest construction plans. Not that he would even then have any sympathy. See, he's a big government man, and having never held a private sector job his parents didn't give him, his contempt for the way the world works crowds out common sense. And like the next heading says, the business leaders have been fooled. If there is any potential upside to such a sour, sneering debut, it is that a speech should serve as a belated alarm to the business and political leaders who played footsie with him, with the belief that underneath his radical rhetoric, there existed a reasonable man who could be charmed into cooperation. Oh, how pleased they were with themselves when he visited their plush high-rise offices and flashed that toothy grin and put his hand over his heart as if to signal that he and they were fellow members of the Brotherhood of the Enlightened. Surely he was someone they could work with, and that's all they wanted. They were flattered by his attention, and now they should be prepared to be fleeced and condemned. Similarly, significant numbers of Jewish leaders and voters were snookered into the first Muslim mayor's promises of protection from the ravages of anti-Semitism. Their capitulation is impossible to defend, given Mandani's virulent opposition to Israel as the Jewish homeland and his failure to denounce Hamas and other terrorists during the last 2 years. To the benighted ilk, anything Israel does to defend itself proves it's guilty of genocide. And then his Jew-hating mentor, who we talked about yesterday. It's not insignificant that the Jew-hating Linda Sarsour is one of his closest advisors, and she recently promised to keep him in line in City Hall. This story is not just about it's random that Zohran is ascended to this place. It is our Muslim American community, she said cryptically, at an event sponsored by the Radical Council on American Relations event last month. The image of Mandani as a puppet whose strings are pulled by her recalls that that his parents also both hate Israel. They don't seem to be very fond of America either. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, is a Columbia University professor who can be seen on a video from 2022 conference arguing that Hitler got his idea for the Holocaust by, get this, by studying how Abraham Lincoln and America dealt with Native Americans. The U.S. put Indians in reservations. They herded American Indians into separate territories. For the Nazis, this was the inspiration. Hitler realized two things. One, that genocide was doable. It is possible to do genocide. That's what Hitler realized, Mandani's father said. That's one concession the next mayor has made on the topic is a promise not to again use the phrase globalize the Intifada. He promised not to say that again, but as the article concludes, that's worth next to nothing if he continues to support the policies of anti-Semites and surrounds himself with terrorist sympathizer. Good. And it ends with good luck. Good luck, New York. You'll need it. Well, not only New York, but the whole United States of America is going to need help if more Mandanis show up to run for office. And then there's a third headline. This is from Virtual Jerusalem. Mandani's win endangers all Jews, not just New Yorkers, and something we touched on the other day. The election of an avowed anti-Zionist as New York's mayor signals not merely a political upset, it's a moral and civilizational warning to Jews everywhere that anti-Israel ideology now wears the mantle of power. Get this, for more than a century, New York City has been the beating heart of the Jewish diaspora, a city whose mayors, whether liberal or conservative, shared an instinctive respect for Jewish life and Israel's legitimacy. That era ended Tuesday night with the victory of Zohran Mamdani, a man who proudly identifies as an anti-Zionist, who refuses to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, and who once justified the slogan, globalize the Intifada. Mamdani's election is not just a change in city politics, it marks a dangerous normalization of hostility towards Israel and inevitably towards Jews. It signals that the most influential Jewish community outside Israel, more than 1 million strong, now lives under a mayor who regards their homeland as a moral stain and their solidarity with it as suspect. All right, that was a good story there. So true. His election opens the door for avowed anti-Semites to run for office while openly declaring their detestation for the Jewish people, how much they detest the Jews. All right, now this is another example of sign 21 from our book, 25 Signs. We're near the end, and that is there'll be a rise in anti-Semitism. The entire world will be against Israel. The book is a free download from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible Prophecy. And we see this more and more. With his election, unfortunately, there are going to be more people coming out of the woodwork running for office. They're going to have the same mantra. And sadly, there's people after, people group after people group who buys into this, who hates Israel, who hates the Jews, who believes they're committing genocide in Gaza, and who can't wait to jump on the bandwagon and vote somebody else in who will turn everything around. So tonight, as we finish this second edition of Breaking News, the story like we talked about since yesterday, today's already Thursday, the 2 full days that we're getting used to the idea that he's going to be the mayor of New York on January 1st. It's a sad story, and more people already are deciding to leave New York. You've got people going out in droves. You have people scared to death that are going to stay there, and it's not going to be very pretty. And of course, what Michael Goodwin's story tells us, the speech that he gave was so arrogant. And, he's a sore winner. He just considers everybody's got to bow down to him. So this will not be a nice time for New York, who voted this person in against all logic, and particularly those who are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow morning on another edition of Breaking News. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.